Today I'm going to read to you In the Small, Small Pond by Denise Fleming. We've read several others of her stories this year, and she does both the words and the pictures. Now, in this story, there is a frog on every page, and while I read the words, you should be looking for the frog. But on some pages, it's trickier than others, because on some pages, you only see part of the frog. Let's go, and we'll also meet some other animals in this story. In the Small, Small Pond. In the small, small pond, does the child look surprised by what happened? I think he found the frog as the frog was jumping in the water. I only see the frog's legs on this page. Wiggle, jiggle, tadpoles wriggle. Some of you probably already know that tadpoles hatch from an egg and then they transform into a frog as they grow. They transform very slowly, and first they grow some legs, a little stump for a leg, and then they get longer, and finally they lose their tail. This page, we see most of the frog. We actually see the whole frog's body on this page. Waddle, wade, geese parade. Now on this page, we see a goose, an adult goose, and we see baby geese over here, which are also called goslings. By now, I bet you found the frog. There is the frog. Hover, shiver, wings quiver. So besides the frog, there's another creature on this page. I always like dragonflies. Have you found the frog yet? There's the frog. Drowse, doze, eyes close. There's some other visitors on this page on the log with the frog. Do you see the turtles? Sometimes turtles like to swim in the water, and sometimes they like to sit out on a log or a rock in the sun. And right here's our frog again. Lash, lunge, herons plunge. That frog is jumping away from the heron. Splitter, splatter, minnows scatter. The minnows are all these little fish in the water. And you probably see that there are some flowers growing in the water too. Circle, swirl, whirligigs twirl. Now, whirligigs are a type of water bug that likes to live on the surface of the water. Do you see the frog? The frog is pretty well hidden in this page. There's the frog. Sweep, swoop, swallows scoop. The swallow is another type of bird that comes to the pond, and there's some pond grasses. Do you see the frog in this picture? It's on this side. Click, clack, claws crack. Now, this creature looks like he's trying to get the frog, and this frog is trying to get away. This is called a crayfish. Some people call them crawdads, but they're different from a lobster because they are smaller and they live in fresh water like ponds and streams. There's the frog. Dabble, dip, tails flip. Sometimes when you go to the pond, Ducks like to have their bottom in the air because they like to get food out of the water. Do you see the frog on this page? There's the frog. Splish splash, pause flash. Now here's a raccoon down by the water catching a fish to eat, and they tend to like to wash their paws first. The frog is trying to get out of the way. I also notice a pretty pond flower called a cattail. Pile, pack, muskrats stack. They're making a house on the water. Do you see the frog watching them? The frog's down here. Chill, breeze, winter freeze. How do we know that it's getting colder? Do you see the snow? The frog is still there. But I think it's time for the frog to go to sleep. Cold night, sleep tight, small, small pond. He's made a nest for himself in the mud of the pond for the winter. Boys and girls, we just read In the Small, Small Pond, and now we're going to meet some more animals that might live around a pond. Now, a pond is a habitat where animals and plants live together and grow. There are lots of other habitats, and I am sure that if you were with me, you could tell me many more habitats, like the ocean or the rainforest or the desert. But there are many more you might want to think about, and you can probably even find more information about them. But since we couldn't be together, I wanted to show you some things that would be in a pond nearby, and maybe sometime you will get a chance to go see a pond yourself. Some of the things that I'm showing you don't necessarily have to be around a pond. You might even find them around your neighborhood if you took a walk. But you can see already I have my pond set up, and I have a frog who's sitting on a lily pad, and then I have a duck who's floating in the water, and sometimes there are beavers there, and the beavers like to chop down trees to make a beaver dam so that they can live in it. And they like to go, they have a door that they go in under the water so you can't see them, and they build their pile tall, and it floats on the water. Also, we have our whirligig, which you saw in our story. Now, there are some other insects that might come to visit our pond as well. We had in our book the dragonfly. Sometimes there might be a regular fly. One of my favorites is a ladybug. Or another insect we might see is a grasshopper. Now, along the edge of the pond, you might see caterpillars, and eventually caterpillars sometimes turn into butterflies that can then fly over the pond. Now, there's another insect that's not as pretty, or another creature that's not as pretty besides the insects, and this one is called a centipede, and he might live in the dirt around the pond. Also, other animals that might come to the edge of the pond and visit and go on rocks or logs or even in the water are turtles and snakes. And not all snakes are something you should be afraid of, but you certainly should not try to touch them, because even if they're not poisonous, they could bite you. Now, the pond is a very active place for animals during the day, and some of the birds that fly around the pond can't swim like the duck. But the eagle likes to come to the pond and fish. They like to eat fish, so they might swoop down and catch some fish. We also have all manner of little birds like bluebirds and cardinals and blackbirds, different other birds that like to come, and they might have their nest in the trees near the pond. And finally, this is probably one of the birds that people don't admire the most, but he's called a vulture or a buzzard. And even though he's not the prettiest bird, he's a very important bird because he collects the trash. Like, when I say trash, I mean dead animals and things that aren't good. And he eats them. And especially this is important because if there was an animal that was sick, the disease will end with the vulture because he eats them and then it doesn't get passed on. So even though he's not attractive, he's an important bird, and you might see him near a pond, or you might see him if you were driving around. There are 2 more visitors that usually come to the pond in the evening. We saw one of them in this story. Maybe you remember the raccoon likes to come down to the water and was catching some fish. Also, here's another visitor that comes at night, and some people get scared of him. He likes to fly over, but he is a bat. And bats are very important because they eat many, many insects. And if we didn't have them, we would have many more insects. They eat things like mosquitoes. And anybody who's been outside on a summer evening knows that it's not fun to get bitten by a mosquito. So if we did not have bats around, we would have many more mosquitoes and pests. So boys and girls, I hope that you have enjoyed my discussion about the pond life, and I hope at some point you will get to go and see the pond. But if there is a story that's particularly interesting to you about an animal, then please feel free to check it out. I have one more thing I wanted to show you. Underneath the water, there are other animals that live down in the mud of the pond. Now, sometimes our turtle and our snake might go there, but also we have things like grasses, which are important for small animals to hide in so they don't get eaten. And then we have other kinds of fish. And then we have the crawfish, which I think you guys looked at, and some of you probably thought was a lobster. But a crawfish is about this big, whereas a lobster usually is about this big. So it's a different animal, even though it looks the same, and it lives in fresh water instead of salt water. So that is the different areas of the pond, near the pond, on the water, and down in the mud. Those are the different areas that animals live near the pond, and all of them are part of the pond habitat.